Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I'm excited for this episode because this is near to my heart, excuse me, in that I have family that has been impacted by autism. And this month is Autism Awareness Month. And I thought it would be really cool to not only help you as parents that may be struggling, that has a child that maybe is autistic in some form, or maybe you know somebody that is that you want to try and help. But I wanted to have a guest on that has some background and knowledge in autism and dealing with autism to help you as parents. So I say all that only to welcome Jessica Hurlbut to Dad Up Podcast. Thank you for joining me,
Awesome.
Jessica.
Thank you so much, Bryan. I'm super happy to be here. And any chance I get to talk and bring awareness about autism, the better. So yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining me. It is it's unique or unusual to have a mom on my show, but I have had moms on my show from time to time because moms are just as important as dads. They do a lot to help our kids. But Jessica in particular, her role as a mom carries a lot of busyness in her day.
Yes.
Because I'll let her tell the story, but she's got her hands full, and I'll let her talk about it. But Jessica, for my listeners who may not know who you are, want to learn a little bit more about you, give me a background of you, kind of how you grew up, how
Sure.
you got into the things you're doing now, and then
Yep.
also about all your kids.
Yep. Well, yeah. So me and my husband are pastors in upstate New York. And we started as youth pastors for 11 years. Had a family eventually, waited a few years, had my son, and then kind of had my daughter. It was one of those oops, like right on top of my son. So they're only a year apart. So I was a busy mom from the get-go as soon as we started having kids. But my daughter, Mara, who's now 14, she probably by two, she was just a lot of crying, a lot of, we just thought maybe she was having stomach issues. And, we kept kind of looking into things. We started early intervention. We had some teachers come and work with her because she wasn't speaking, but she was very capable in a lot of ways. Like she walked at 9 months. She was just like a really busy child, but just had a lot of meltdowns and didn't have a lot of words. And at the time, I didn't even know what autism was. I remember once watching a commercial. It was probably during this month of April, and it was about autism awareness. And I remember saying to my husband, at the time that how did I say it? I go, I don't understand autism. Does that just mean, we don't know what's wrong with your kid or your kid's awkward and we're just going to call it autism? I mean, I had zero understanding or education. And so when they started kind of suggesting that about my daughter, I was just like, it was this world I didn't understand. And it was very scary at the time. So she was diagnosed at 3. She's level 3, which that just kind of puts her at the severe end of the spectrum. And it was a couple hard years of just trying. I just am a sponge. So I tried to learn and learn and learn and which was great. I think it's good for parents to like get a lot of knowledge and really understand what's happening in a child's brain and how you can best work with them and help them. But I think at some point, for me personally, it's almost like she became more of a project than my daughter. Like I kept trying to fix her, and it's like almost God spoke to my heart at one point and said, Jessica, I didn't call you to fix her. I called you to love her. And like something in me shifted then, where it's like, of course, I still wanted the best therapies and the best classroom settings and all the best, supplements and all these things I could get for her. But something shifted in my heart where I just kind of had to say, you know what? I love my daughter just as she is. Even if she doesn't make the progress I hope she makes. She eventually started talking. And during that time, me and my husband kind of went back and forth because the doctors had said, because your daughter's severe, you have a 1 in 4 chance that if you have other children, they would also be on the spectrum.
Mm.
We just kind of really wrestled with that. And I know a lot of families do. Like what do we want to like play this game? What are the odds? But really wanting a big family, so it was a very hard season for us. And so we kind of started the process of fostering then, like kind of took the classes and we just said, maybe we'll adopt, maybe we won't have any more biological children, but we want a big family. And just the timing was kind of funny. We got our first like placement, and he was a newborn little African American boy, super adorable. And a week later, I found out I was pregnant. So we were like,
Wow.
no. So we ended up having, both of them close together. I had my son, 8 months later. And during that time, why I was pregnant, we were still doing visits with their biological parents because we weren't sure if, we were just fostering. We weren't sure if they were going to, get them back or if they were going to be up for adoption. And we found out halfway through my pregnancy that the mom of our foster son was pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Oh, and we were like, oh no. And so, yeah, lo and behold, 9 months later, our foster son had a sister too. And social services said to us, we want to keep the siblings together. And if you're interested in adopting, we want you to consider both of them. So I've got this newborn baby. I've got this foster son we've fallen in love with. And we're like, oh my goodness, we're going to have another child. And yep. So with a lot of prayer and some time to think about it, we said yes. And so now I have 5 children. 2 are adopted. And my son, my biological son that I did have around the age of 3, although he didn't have meltdowns, he was a very loving kid, a very good, like mild behavior kid. He wasn't speaking. So we had to go through kind of the same process of having him evaluated. We went to the same developmental center, drove the same highway and got the same news that he was level 3, also my son Jacob. And so now I have, my son is now 10 and my daughter's 14, the 2 that are on the spectrum. But really, since that time, a lot has progressed. They've made a lot of progress, but they are still both considered severe and they're considered disabled for life. If nothing changes, they will live with us for the rest of our lives and we will care for them. But as we're kind of getting to this place where they're not little toddlers anymore and we're not dealing with the meltdowns and that kind of stuff, me and my husband really just decided we want to do something to help parents in this situation. Because I remember scouring the internet for books, podcasts, anything that could give me like hope. And there was information out there, but it was either very heavily like science brain oriented, which is interesting, or very we got this product, it's going to cure autism. Like there was just these kind of 2 camps, and there was nothing there for me that I felt like gave me hope, or even just to hear from another parent that, wow, somebody gets what I'm going through. There just wasn't anything. And so about a year and a half ago, me and my husband said, we're going to start a podcast to be the people that we needed when our kids were young and first diagnosed. So we've been doing that for a year and a half. It's called the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast. And it's been so rewarding for us to feel like, man, like purpose in it, right? Like this isn't all just for nothing. And we love our kids, of course, but even all the pain it almost feels redemptive. Like we can really speak into other people's lives, like we needed. So yeah, that's what we're up to.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there because first you're deciding whether or not to have any more kids, possibly
Yeah.
looking into adoption because you want a big family and asking the Lord, why is this happening? What are you trying to tell us? And the Lord says, I'm trying to give you a big family.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
here you have boom, 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 back to back to back kids. Let's talk a little bit about the adoption side of things first,
Yeah.
because I think that a lot of parents struggle with that. My wife and I have actually talked about that, adopting, and I have 2 boys, 24 and 21, and they're awesome. And I have never, since we stopped having kids, because my older son was born 6.5 weeks early. He was premature. They said that he may have some challenges growing up in his life,
Right.
but he's 24 now and 6'3" and thriving, so he's fine. My younger son, when he was born 2.5 weeks early, but he was born at 10 pounds, so he was a big boy. But my wife she had lost a lot of blood during the pregnancy,
Yeah, that's
and
scary. Yeah.
she ended up in the ICU for 2 weeks on essentially all the machines, dialysis. She was in a
Wow.
medically induced coma, all that kind of stuff. So I tell that brief story just because that was the reason why, okay,
Yeah.
we're done. We have two great kids. Now, my wife's perfectly fine. She's perfectly healthy, but
Right.
we have two great kids, and we're done. But my wife and I have also talked about adopting.
Hmm.
And I know that the adoption system is rough for kids.
Hmm.
The system, as they call it, is rough for the
Yes.
kids that are there. How challenging of a decision was it for you guys if parents may be struggling with whether
Yeah.
or not to adopt?
It was definitely challenging, but it's like now I look back in hindsight and obviously everyone's story is different, right? Different experience with adoption, but and it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy decision, but I think one of the things that makes people so scared is that whole thing. What if there's something wrong with the child? And
Mm-hmm.
there's it's such an illusion, right? We live in this illusion that we can control
Mm-hmm.
outcomes and we can
Mm-hmm.
control our life. And so we structure it a certain way to make sure things are neat and in order. And it's funny because you got someone like me and my husband who are super healthy. I ate all the kale and I'm a runner and did all the right things, didn't take, any medicine during took my prenatals. And we have two severely autistic children.
Mm-hmm.
And then we adopt two children through foster care, and everybody's like, oh, you better watch out. Their parents use drugs and all of these things, and they're perfectly fine. And I just feel like it's almost like God taught me through this whole process. You don't have control. You can try to convince ourselves as parents and even as Christians that we can control what happens to us, but that's where like God's trying to teach us to trust. Like even in the hard, right? Like I don't have control of how my biological children, like what they're capable of, and I don't have
Mm-hmm.
control when I adopt. They're both the same, but we think they're not. We think I can do A, B, and C, and then this will make everything, work just right. But even in it, it's like even now, me and my husband have said, looking back, would we change anything? Would we still adopt? Would we have another child, after we struggled with our daughter Mara? And we're like, we wouldn't change anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's changed us so much. It's almost like we don't know what we need and we don't know what God wants to bless us with. And we have to come at our lives with open hands and not stop trying to control it all, really. And so, honestly, it's like adoption is probably one of the best decisions we've ever made. And not just because our kids are, our biological kids are disabled, but there's something so beautiful about that redemption of it. Like, they were suffering a loss and we were able to step in and say yes, even despite what we were facing. Because I remember when I talked to my family, my parents and siblings and said, we want to adopt, they all looked like we had 10 heads. Like, you have too much on your plate. And I just realized like God challenged me in that moment because I was home. I used to work full time. We were full-time youth pastors. And then I worked part-time. And then when my daughter was diagnosed, I ended up having to quit working altogether, which was okay. I felt like it was God, but because of her extreme behaviors, she couldn't do daycare. You just couldn't do anything. Um, and I went through 6 months of real bad depression. Like, God, I love my daughter, but this is not the life I pictured. And here I am just stuck at home. Like Bryan, we couldn't do like playgrounds even.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't drive through a drive-through because like she'd start screaming and we have to drive away. I mean, it was insane during that season. And I really struggled with depression. And God said to me one day when I was sitting in the house with her, what's something you can do now that you couldn't do before? And that question just made me really angry. Nothing. I can't leave my house.
Right.
But he just kept asking me that every day. It's like I could just hear it, in my head. What's something you could do now that you couldn't do before? And it's like God reminded me when I was a teenager and young adult, I always said I wanted to adopt. And I kind of felt like, well, what's happened in my life has nullified that. I can't do that now. And he was like, God was kind of challenging me. If you're ever going to adopt a child, wouldn't you want to be home full time to bond with them?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you want, child that you didn't give birth to, wouldn't you want to have that time to invest at home? This is the perfect time, even though in the natural, it doesn't feel like it, And so I look back now and it's like, we didn't know we were going to have another biological child. And like, we just didn't know the future. And I think, man, God knew not just, we thought we were saving them,
Mm-hmm.
but it was like they were saving us too. Like,
Yeah.
Like, my oldest son, who's a typical teenager, like he wouldn't have had a sibling that he could go play basketball with. Like he wouldn't, like, all of those things we didn't realize because we didn't know we were going to have two kids with autism that struggled in that way. He has all of those things now. It's beautiful. It's like if you let God create your family, it's way more beautiful than what we try to control ourselves. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I think that for parents that may be struggling with it, obviously they can try fostering for a bit and see how that goes.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah, there's
commit.
something called, there's no commitment. There's something called respite too, where you can just agree. You don't even have to start fostering yet. You just agree to do respite. And that just means like, because what happens is foster families can't take their foster children with them, say on vacation, especially if it's out of state. It's usually not allowed, whether they have visits or because they have some state order that they can't leave the state they're living in. So if they want to go on vacation or, they have a wedding or whatever, they need to leave. The only people that foster child can stay with are people that have taken the certification. So other foster parents or families that say, okay, maybe I'm not ready to foster or adopt, but I want to do respite. And so you take kind of the same courses you would if you're going to foster, but you're just a respite home. So you would take that one child for the weekend, for the week.
Right.
So it's a great way to just kind of get your toes in and say, okay, let's just see what this is like. Let's see how my family, dynamic, how we mesh with this. We did some respite before we started fostering also, and it was good for us to kind of just get that, under our belt and be able to, and you
Yeah.
just realize the funny thing too is, every kid, like even all these kids, that come from maybe broken homes or hard situations, they're all just kids.
Right.
Like, I don't know what we think, but they're literally kids. And obviously some have bigger struggles than others, but it's the longer they're in the system that the struggles tend to appear.
Right.
Oh, and that's been a big thing. When we adopted, I didn't understand it, but I came to realize over time that there right now is over 125,000 kids in the US. So there's 500,000 kids in foster care. So 500,000
Wow.
kids, but 125,000 of those, so like, quarter, a little less than a quarter, but are free to be adopted. So they might be staying with a foster home that doesn't want to adopt them, or they're in a group home, or there's different situations, but they're freed. Their parents have no rights. But I say this in like not a very political sense. No one wants them.
Mm. Yeah.
125,000 of them. And it's usually they're minorities. Like my son's African American, so I have like a heart for that. Their special needs of some form. It could be something as mild as ADHD, but somebody sees that and thinks, well, I don't know if I want to go there. I don't know if I want to foster that child. So special needs, minorities, and sibling groups. Because they try to keep siblings together, right? So you might want to adopt one, but you're like, I don't want to adopt 4 kids, right?
Right.
They sit in the system until they age out. It's crazy. I just found that so crazy because I knew so many families that had gone overseas to adopt and spent tons of money, or had done all these, fertility treatments, because they were trying to have a child and spent so much money. I'm thinking, we have 125,000 kids in our backyard that no one wants.
Yeah, it breaks my heart to picture these kids, that are just wanting somebody to love them, right? And it really just breaks my heart. And to think that parents, I understand parents want their own biological kids, so they spend all this money to go through these fertility tests. I get that. I understand that part of it. But it's like at some point you need to really just reach out to God and go, what do you want me to do? Because this is taking a lot from us, and this clearly isn't happening. And we want children. And
exactly,
like you said, 125,000, that's insane. That is amazing. Well, bless you guys, you and your husband for taking that leap. Like I said, my wife and I have talked about it briefly. I haven't been a big advocate for it just because I like the way our setup is now with two
Right. Yeah.
boys, and they're grown and we're ready to
They're
be,
adults now
we're
almost. Yeah.
empty nesters pretty much.
Yep.
So I'm kind of enjoying that side of things, but my wife really wanted to have a lot of kids like you guys.
Yeah.
And unfortunately it just wasn't in the cards for us. But anyways, we could talk for hours about the adoption side, but
So
this
good.
episode is really towards the struggles that parents face
Mhm.
with autism, and I think that there's a lot. And you talked about it with being on the spectrum as far as what level your daughter
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
being on the spectrum. I have a cousin, as we talked about before this episode was recording. I have a cousin whose daughter, her name's Gabby. She was just diagnosed last September, and she's right on the border between 1 and 2.
Mhm.
Intellectually, she's very smart, but socially, she experiences a
Yes.
lot of anxieties, and she has trouble expressing through facial expressions and things like that.
Yep.
And my cousin, Gabby, is a sweet girl. She's so kind and so loving. My cousin is just wants to pour love into her, but they've
Yep.
been doing together as mother and daughter. They've been doing a lot of research together to help
Yep.
Gabby understand what she's going through. Um, for somebody like that, maybe my cousin or another parent that maybe, is a pretty new parent to a child with autism,
Right.
what kind of advice could you give to somebody like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the hardest things and, that I struggled with was other people's perception of my children,
Mm,
right? It's like I love them no matter what. Like, and I'm going to walk with them, like you said, your cousin, and like, you're just so committed to your kids. Like, come hell or high water, we're going to get through this and we're going to learn and we're going to grow. I think one of the hardest things is other people's perception, other people's advice, even. I mean, people, you'd get the stranger in Walmart want to tell you what you should do with your child or what you didn't do. And that's why they're like this. And you almost got to tune out the world and just really focus on your child, because God entrusted you with this child for a reason, right? Like, one thing that God said to me, when I was dealing with my son being diagnosed, also, that was just real hard, was he said, I know it feels like, why me? But it was like he almost flipped the script and said, that's why. Like, you feel
right,
like this is, you can view this as like, this is a burden, this is hard, but it's actually, I trusted you so much that I
right.
gave you these children, right? And all of a sudden it feels more like an honor and a privilege than like, oh, why me? Like, poor me. It's like, no, like God knows that he could trust us, that we were going to love them unconditionally, that we were going to give them everything that we could in our power to help them be who God's created them to be. And so I think that would be one of the biggest things, would be just drown out the world, the noise around you, other people's opinions. Everybody thinks they're an expert. Somebody watches one documentary or, whatever, read something online. They think they know everything. I actually had a lady, this is a terrible story, but a lady back a few years ago cornered me on Mother's Day. We were at church to tell me that the reason why my children were autistic is because they were vaccinated
Oh my god, this was at
on Mother's
church,
Day.
on
And
Mother's Day at church.
to the point that
Wow.
I'm trying to tell her, okay, I'm glad that's what you think. I don't really want to talk about this now, being very polite. And she just was like, chased me all the way out to the parking lot. My daughter ended up having a meltdown because she could tell I was stressed out. So my daughter's screaming. The lady's completely oblivious to what's happening around her, like, oh, I should let them go home, and literally like following me all the way out to the car.
Wow.
So it's sometimes I think that's harder than even the struggles we have with our children, you know? And I could let those things get to you. You can really let things eat away at you. Because for
Hmm.
me, for years with my daughter Mara, when she was young, I would rehearse, what did I do wrong? Like, did I miss my prenatal vitamins? Did I
Mm.
take, I don't know, ibuprofen? Did I shovel the driveway? I changed the cat litter once. I mean, crazy stuff that you're
Yeah,
like, this
yeah.
does not cause autism. But because it is such this, it's like the whole symbol for autism is a puzzle piece, right? Because they don't really know. They don't understand. They see that it is increasing exponentially and they can't figure out why. You know, I looked up the newest statistic, which is crazy. This just came out from the CDC, is it's 1 in 36 kids are diagnosed with autism now.
Wow.
1 in 36. I think the last one before that was 1 in 56. And then I remember when my daughter was diagnosed, I want to say it was 1 in 80. So 1 in 36 kids. It's so prevalent. It's crazy. So I think that's another thing
Wow.
as parents is you want to kind of almost beat yourself up or try to figure it out. And that is just a dark hole.
Yeah.
It doesn't solve anything, right? It's
Right.
well, that's one of the biggest things that I struggled with for years. And God just told me, when he just spoke to my heart, he said, you have to die to the why, Jessica.
Hmm.
We all have to die to whys in our life, right? Why did I lose this loved one? You know, why did I go through the divorce? Whatever the why is, and you beat yourself up about it. But at some point, you just have to die to that, because I don't get to know that answer. And even knowing it, like if I could have figured out, if they come out tomorrow and say, you know, autism is caused by too much Tylenol or something, it's not going to change my situation. I think we
Right.
think if I can get to the root of it, I don't know, like, I don't know what that is in our human nature that needs to know the why, but it doesn't help you. It really distracts you, and it
Right.
causes you to beat your own self up as a parent. It's like, I am a good parent, and there is nothing that I can pinpoint to say you caused this to happen to your children, you know? And just being able to now say, what do I do now? Not what happened in the past. What do we do now? You know? So
Yeah. A couple things that you talked about there that that I want to address. First of all, you talked about what do the advice you get from other people,
mhm,
or and to not listen to it. Basically, your child, and I think that's what's important in that
yeah,
in what you're saying. In before talking to you over the last couple of days, was doing a little bit of research on autism and stuff like that, and that was one of the things that was said that I read was that parents that have autistic children need to stop listening to other people try to give them advice,
yes,
because nobody knows your child better than you do.
hmm,
So stop listening to other people that don't know anything about it try to give you advice, and just and your child, so just
yeah.
love your child. um
It's hard to do sometimes though too,
right.
because you feel like you don't know a lot. Like, you know what I mean? You're grasping for answers. And of course, if there's people that come into your child's life, like, teachers that are trained, in ABA, which is a program that a lot of kids on the spectrum do, you want to listen to those people and glean from their knowledge. But you're right. The truth is, everybody's going to have an opinion and try to tell you what you need to do or not do. And you can't run down every rabbit hole. And
Yeah. I also think that parents, and this is what I think any parent should do, whether you have autistic children or not. But I also think parents need to learn to change their vocabulary. And what I mean by that is, I hear a lot of dads, especially dads that I coach, I hear a lot of dads say, "Oh, I can't meet with you this day because I have to take my son to his baseball practice, or I have to take my daughter to her dance recital." And I say, stop saying have to,
right.
because it's a privilege to do that. The children that God gave us are a loan to us from Him, and we're supposed to raise them because He trusted in us to raise these
Good.
children. So you get to do those things. So,
Yes.
yes, you can't come to the meeting because you get to take your son to the baseball, or you get
Yes.
to take your daughter to dance recital. The same thing that you were saying about why, and why you're asking God why, God's looking at you and saying, why not? Right?
Yes.
Why not?
It's that shift from feeling like parenting is a burden to feeling like parenting is a privilege that
Right.
God's given me, right? Like, this is an honor, this is a privilege. Even if it did, and I think that's where we get caught up sometimes, is even if it doesn't look like what I thought it would. Because that's the kicker. And that can be different. It doesn't have to be just a child on the spectrum. Right. I think in life, we will come to these places where this is not what I thought it was going to look like, right? In my life, whatever that is. But that doesn't mean God's still not in it. And that's where I think we get tripped up, is where it doesn't look like what I envisioned. Okay. But what if God has something better for you? And you might
Right.
think, well, this doesn't feel better. Well, you're not there yet. You don't know. You haven't seen what he wants to do over the course of your life. Right. Yeah, that's really good, Bryan.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, God works in mysterious ways, and he's working behind the scenes, and we may not
Exactly.
understand everything that he's doing, or we may not understand why it's happening or why it's not happening. But I was just having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they're like, I've just kind of lost all hope in God because I've gone through
Mm,
these traumatic experiences, and I've prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed, and nothing's happening. And I said, keep praying.
yeah,
Because here's the thing, you may not ever get the answer. And maybe what God's trying to do is get you to reconnect with him. And so you
exactly.
need to keep praying. And sometimes that means just being still, just being still. And I also encourage this person to go to church because they hadn't gone to church in 10 or 12 years. And I
Yeah,
said, you know what? I came here and started talking to you about something else. And here we are talking about our faith. Maybe there was a reason why I was supposed to come talk to you.
it's good.
There's different things that happen
That
behind the
that's
scenes.
really good. That's the other piece of advice you said, that whole idea of church. I would really encourage any parent out there that it calls themselves a Christian, that is, has a child on the spectrum, plug into a local church, because
Mm,
I mean, my parents retired around the time my daughter was diagnosed. My dad retired. He worked his whole life at a aluminum plant here, worked really, really hard. And they moved away right soon after my daughter was diagnosed, and we were fostering. And so we just had, like, we were in this just horrible place. And I'm like, I'm losing my parents, like my support. And if it wasn't for my church family, I mean, I can't tell you, like, when we started fostering, we walked into the office one day, and they had filled the entire office with diapers because we had so many babies. The entire office, and everybody just decided we're going to buy them all diapers. It was just everything from, there was a lady in our church. Her kids were grown. She was a single lady, a little bit older, and she was like, I want to help out. So she went through the whole certification for fostering. She didn't want to foster, just so she could watch my kids,
mm, that's
just so
awesome.
that we could go, me and my husband could go for a night, 2 hours away, and just have a weekend away or whatever. There is just so many people that want to help you. That's why it's called the body of Christ, right? But we try to do this life ourselves,
Mm,
and I think sometimes when we're in these places of need, we realize I can't, but most of the time we just live oblivious and just kind of do our thing. But it's like God brings us to this place to realize, like, you weren't ever meant to do this yourself. You need people, and not just your mom or whoever, because you need a whole body of people. We were youth pastors. We had the teenagers come over once and cleaned our whole house, and, bought us a gift certificate and said, go out to dinner. We're watching the kids. I mean, I could tell you story after story after story. And it's not just like, oh, we're lucky and we're special. God wants that for every single family that's struggling with this. But
mm.
you have to plug yourself into a local church. You have to let people in. You know what I mean? You have to build more than just show up on Sunday, but build relationship with people, in the church, so you can have that spiritual mom, or you can have that, dad kind of come alongside and be the grandma and because there's people out there that so want to help, but they don't
Yeah.
know the need because you're not plugged in. You're not
Yeah.
in relationship. So,
Sometimes it's just simply that you've never asked.
and that's a
Um,
huge part too.
because
Yes.
people don't want to overstep. They don't want to make it seem like they're
Yes.
overstepping. So they may not come to you and say, "Hey, let me watch kids so you guys can go have the day, enjoy yourselves." They don't want to make it seem like they're pouring sympathy or putting
Yes.
sympathy on you guys or
Yes.
whatnot. So sometimes just asking for help.
Which is
And
so hard.
yeah, I know. But the thing is you'll never know unless you ask.
Mhm.
It could be no, we can't help. I'm sorry. But it most likely it's going to be yes.
Yes.
What can we do? And all
Yes.
you have to do is ask. And I think that parents struggle with that, especially, you in particular, like my cousin, it's a scary thing to put not only to put your child who's healthy and not
Yes.
autistic with a stranger, but it could be
Yes.
especially scary to put your autistic child with somebody who may not be familiar
Right.
with it. Right.
Right. Well, that's where the relationship piece comes in, right? Like, we're just meant to have relationship with people, right? So you build those relationships, so you're building trust, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that was a huge struggle for me. Was I am very independent, and God has humbled me over and over and over again. Like, you got to ask for help. You got to ask for help, And I think we're good at this, like, in this country, of being very independent, put your fences up and live in
Mhm.
your house and keep to yourself and figure it out. But it was never the way God intended us to operate, right? But
Of course not.
our culture tells us different. Even now, I mean, even, you can sense that even a Christian culture, right? But it's not. I mean, you look at the early church, right? They shared what they had and they gathered together in homes. Like, they got it. They understood dependence. They were willing to give of what they had. And yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. You could walk down the street and say hi to a complete stranger and give them a smile, and they'll look at you like deer in the headlights. Like, what did you just say to me?
Why?
Okay. Hi. Well, I don't know why you're
Yeah.
saying hi. Like, is there something, it's funny how strangers act when they're greeted by somebody. But
Yep.
um yeah, I think you're right. It takes a village. That's what they say when it comes to parenting, whether you have autistic children,
Yes.
whatever the
Or
case
not.
may be. It takes a village. So if you need help, parents, if you're struggling, if you're at a
That's good.
loss, maybe it is you that needs the help. Maybe it
Mm,
is you that needs the guidance. Maybe it's you that needs the support just for you. Because one of the most important things that we can do as parents,
good.
self-care. And if you're not taking care of yourself as a parent, whether you have autistic children or not, but if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't be 100% plugged in for your family
Good.
or for your children. So for you to have self-care, what is it that you need help with?
Mhm.
And if it's something that is maybe you do need a sitter, meet with people, talk to family, express what you need, because they'll never know unless you ask.
Good.
So I wanted to ask you, when it comes to, I wrote a couple of these things down because I really wanted to make sure I got to them. But when it comes to therapy for autistic children,
Yep.
um, I've done some reading on different types of therapy and stuff. But I want to know from you that
Yeah.
has two autistic children. When it comes to therapy for these
Yeah.
children, what's the best thing, or which thing?
In my opinion, I went away and did a play therapy when my daughter was young, just to kind of learn how to play and interact. Because the thing with autism is it's a social disorder, right? And so they struggle to look you in the eyes. They'd rather do things on their own, even playing. They'll play beside you rather than playing with you. So I learned a lot through play therapy, which was good. But I think what has made the most dramatic impact in my kids' lives has been ABA, which is applied behavior analysis. New York State is an amazing state as far as people with disabilities. They just have so much to offer. So my kids are able to go to a 40-hour-a-week school, fully funded by the state. That's applied behavior analysis. And basically what that means, it's very complicated, but the easy explanation is my kids have a teacher all day long that's one-on-one just with them. So because it's a social disorder, if you were to put, say, my children, for example, in a classroom and the teacher were to teach from the front, that child, because they're already struggling with social stuff, can't connect with that teacher way up there at the front. They're going to be distracted. They're going to be, in their own little world. They're not going to learn. You would think put them with a bunch of kids that will help them socialize, but it's actually kind of the opposite because they need to connect one-on-one, whether that's with one child or one teacher. So ABA is, so right now I think there's 8 kids in my daughter's class and there's 12 teachers.
Wow.
And basically they rotate every 30 minutes. So each child has a session with one teacher for 30 minutes. And every one of those children have an individualized learning plan. So they're not all doing the same thing. We're not all teaching, multiplication, everybody. We're going to just teach the same thing to the whole class. It's really based upon where they're at and what they need. So this one's learning to read. This one can't read yet. This one needs to learn to tie their shoes. This one. So it's super, super specific and it's all one-on-one. And
Hmm.
they use a lot of kind of like rewards for the kids too. So it's like if they conquer something, they find things that they really like. It could be a toy, it could be a treat, whatever it is, something that is specific to that child. And if they tie their shoes or if they write the ABCs all out, at the end of that 30 minutes, they've earned that reward,
Got it.
so they get to play with this toy for 10 minutes. So it's very, everything is documented too, so you can see the growth over the long term, right? Individually documented, and even the struggles too. Like my daughter, although she's 14, she still has very few and far between, but she still has moments where she has meltdowns, even at 14. Because a lot of times she gets frustrated when she can't convey what she wants with her words, and her temperament is just a lot more agitated than my son. But they'll document those so they can see what led up to this meltdown. How many times has she had a meltdown? And they can look over the years as they collect all of this data to see, wow, look how much she's improved, or look, this is where we struggled here and why. So it's a amazing program. Unfortunately, and it is available all throughout the United States, but a lot of times it's not always state funded. So there's autism schools that kids can go to, but a lot of times they're private and you have to pay for them. I had a friend who had to refinance her house to pay for 1 year of ABA, which is just a crime to me. I think it should be available to the children that need it. We believe in the idea that every child has the right to an education. Well, we also need to give them the education that they're able to, connect and learn with, like to accommodate that. So for me, but that's been a game changer. Both of my kids are able to read. My son is an avid reader. He never stops reading. He'll bring a book where he'll walk looking down, reading a book. I mean, he loves reading. They both can read. They both can write. They didn't think my daughter would ever speak, and she talks a lot more than my son now. She talks too much sometimes, but they still struggle with the social piece. Like a lot of times my daughter, who's 14, she'll talk, but she's not necessarily having a conversation with me. She'll want to like repeat something she's heard on a movie over and over again. And that's one of the struggles with kids on the severe end of the spectrum. They can really get into these rote things where they want to say the same thing or do the same thing over and over. And you got to kind of always try to pull them out of that through interacting with them one-on-one. So yeah, that would be my best. If you can find an ABA program, it was life-changing for our kids. And they started at 3, which is very young, but they believe between 3 and 5, that window of time is the most, our kids' brains are most malleable. They're most able to so it's a really important age if your kids get diagnosed young to start doing some one-on-one therapy. So
that's interesting. I was not aware of that. I hope I'm sure my cousin will listen to this, but I wonder if she's looked into that.
yeah.
When we're talking about all the data and stuff that is going on right now, especially with dealing with autism, for parents that maybe just discovered that their child is autistic, should they be drowning themselves in research or should they not? I mean, what's the right mute? Because like I said, I drowned myself in research just to talk to you, but
yeah. I mean, I think it's funny. Every person reacts differently. Like I like to use my husband and me as an example. When my daughter was first diagnosed, I wanted to learn everything. It was like my coping mechanism. I'm going to know everything about this so I can help my child the best. And I think that was great for that season. But my husband, it was like he couldn't go there. He didn't want me to eat. It was called the A word in our house. We couldn't say the A word, let alone talk about what I was learning, So he really struggled with this place of just kind of wanting to deny it.
Yeah, I was going to say that's like denial, right? I mean,
yeah. And I think it's easy to say, oh, well, he was wrong and I was right. I don't know. I look back now and I say, that's not true. I think we process differently, right? It's like kind of like the grief process, right? Denial is one of those first steps because it's like, I have to be able to, this is where I am right now. You don't stay there forever. Like my husband obviously is not still in denial 14 years later, but it just took him a while. It took him a while to really let that sink in. And it would have been wrong of me to try to force, you got to watch this documentary. You got to read this book, because that was how I was coping and he wasn't able to do that yet. But there is even an unhealthy side on the other extreme where you learn everything too, because that was where I got to this place where I just became so hyper focused on like, how do I fix it? And it's funny because you think about a child with Down syndrome, no one's trying to fix them.
Right.
they're just loving them, right? Though you have
Right.
a different, have an extra chromosome. We just love you as you are. But because there's this weird mystery about around autism, it's like there's this push all around us to fix your child. And I think it's important to have information and knowledge. I think that there's, even we did a lot of like supplements and naturopathic stuff when my daughter was first young that helped a lot with, she had a lot of other like health issues too. And so I'm not against any of that. But I think at the end of the day, the thing that God challenged me with was, what are you relying on? What do you
Mm.
put your trust in? Is your trust in this therapy? Is your trust in this supplement? Is your trust in this product, or is your trust in me? And when I really started to put it in him, there was a peace that came that I didn't have before. Because I
Mm.
feel almost like we're trying to find the answer out there. And Jesus is the answer, right? Like,
Right.
and knowing him and just having that peace, like he loves our kids more than we do. So, we're not going to miss it in the sense. I think that was my thing. Like, what if I don't learn about this thing and this could have really helped them and I'm going to miss it?
Yeah.
But somehow it's putting everything on my shoulders. Like, I've got to do this. It's not my burden to bear, right? Like, I got to love my child. That's what I'm called to do, right?
Right.
So
I
it's hard. Hard
yeah, I
to
think
find the balance.
right. I think that if parents that are watching this that may have autistic children, if you get nothing out of this other than love your children or love your
Yes.
child, good for you. Because
Mhm.
really that's what it comes down to, how the love that we're pouring into them, because that's what they need from us. That's what they
Good.
need from you. Um, I want to ask you just a couple more questions. I know we've gone kind of long, but this is very important. I want to give as much information as I can
Good.
to parents out there, but just a couple more questions. Number one, I have heard, or I've read, I should say, I've read that the foods that we
Mhm.
eat, obviously as people, it's important to take care of our health, take care of our bodies, take care of our gut, and there's a lot of preservatives and things like that in foods. And they have, kids are allergic to peanuts now and red dye
Yep.
and these different types of things. When it comes to the foods, is there anything dealing with proper foods for
Right.
autistic children?
Yeah. And when my daughter was young, there's something called the specific carbohydrate diet. You can look it up. I mean, kind of the gist of it is you really go really natural, like fruits, vegetables. Um, you don't have any processed foods. We did that for several years, and a, saw a big change. One, in her digestion. She did have gut problems. Her
Hmm.
skin had problems. She was having all these rashes on her skin. It was like her body was reacting to like everything. And it seems to be that a lot of times children on the spectrum have sensitivities to foods or to just like more severe than maybe just a typical child. And so that's something that we tried for several years, and we did see a lot of progress in her. A lot of times though, I had read a book where they had said, if you could heal the gut, if you can heal their gut problem, that will take away all of this brain fog and kind of allow them to speak more and process more, and have some of these struggles with their social issues could disappear. We didn't really ever see that. We definitely did see, because she had so many health issues with her gut, it was like very beneficial for her across the board. But I wouldn't say necessarily, I hoped it would just cure her.
Right.
And that's something I tell people, like, and it sounds horrible, but I'm like, everyone's trying to sell you something. I'm not trying to sell you anything. So just hear what I'm saying. Everyone's trying to sell you something. And it's like the weight loss industry has made so much money because people are desperate to lose weight. So they
Mm-hmm.
sell all kinds of products, all kinds of books, all kinds of programs. And I'm not even saying they can't help. Of course, like, you might need to lose weight. It's something that could help you do that. But I think, who's more desperate than someone that wants to lose weight? A child or a family, parents of children on the spectrum, especially on the severe end. Like, you become desperate for an answer, and unfortunately there's people that prey on that.
Mm.
And so you just got to be careful, because there's just so much out there. I had somebody send me something the other day, say, if you spray this spray on your child, every day, 3 times a day, it will remove all the heavy metals. And then in a month, they'll no longer be autistic. And I was just like, I wish I could just spray a magical spray and all of my problems would go away.
Wow.
People spend so much money on these things because we're just hoping something will work. And I'm not saying science is amazing. If one day they create something that can cure autism, I will be the first one to sign up. But sometimes it's like you got to take a step back and realize everybody's trying to sell me something.
Yeah.
And, what am I putting my trust in? It doesn't mean I can't ever try anything, but at the end of the day, am I putting my trust in God, or am I putting my trust in everything out there, on the market? So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I think that's right on I understand what you're saying, and it makes total sense. I get it. Let me ask you this. For parents, maybe my cousin, her
yeah,
name's Andra, and then her daughter is Gabby. Um, I've talked about it earlier in my show about taking care of yourself, self-care, right? Because if we can't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to
right.
take care of somebody else. What kind of support systems have you maybe utilized or have heard of that would
Right.
be good for parents to kind of get that sense
Yeah.
of, so they're
One of
not
the
feeling so
biggest,
helpless?
yes, one of the biggest things that we did, which I was a little hesitant to do this, but it's called self-direction services.
Okay.
They're located not just in New York State, all across the country. I think you can go online and search the whole country and put in where you live. But basically what it is our New York State has a fund for people that have a disability, for families of disabilities, and they create a budget for you based upon your child's needs, based upon their evaluation and their diagnosis. And they basically set aside, so like our children get $40,000 each. Now we don't get that money,
Mm-hmm.
but that money is set aside in this fund, and it's for whatever we need to help our children. So it could be assistive technology, like we want an iPad when they weren't able to talk that can help them say the words and they press the button. But a lot of times it's also for hiring staff. So like right now we hire them ourselves. So we're not going through an organization. This is the part that I like, because remember how we talked about the idea of relationships,
Mm-hmm.
finding people you can trust. I mean, I could even hire my mom if I wanted to. I mean, she's retired and probably doesn't want to work for me, but so you hire someone you know and trust. We've got 2 young adults that go to our church. So one girl works with my daughter and one works with my son, and they have different goals, but basically it's not school related. It would be to take them out into the community, to take them to social events, to take them out to dinner, whatever it is that they're interested in. My daughter wants to learn horseback riding. And the reason why I say it's so great, obviously our children are get to have experiences they wouldn't have normally, but it also helps us as a family, because I couldn't go take my daughter horseback riding because I have 4 other children. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or say we want to go to amusement park, but we know we couldn't take our whole family, just me and my husband, because we're outnumbered and somebody has a meltdown. What do we do? Well, now we have 2 support staff workers that could come with us to that amusement park, and they're one-on-one with each of our children. And so we're able to do something as a family, right? Or even just like, because the way that the fund works, so there's times they can take our kids out to the community, but there's also what's considered respite hours. So if me and my husband want to get away for the weekend, we have money in that fund to pay who we want to pay. Like, I don't get to call up some organization and have them have somebody come take care of my kids. And we have the funds for it, and the organization pays them like a check, just like a job, to come and stay with our kids for the weekend, so me and my husband can go and have a break.
Hmm.
It's a huge, oh my gosh, like
That's
a huge
awesome.
blessing, because like we're pastors. My husband, I don't work, my husband works as a pastor. He's not rolling in the dough. We don't have the extra money. It's like, like you said, self-care is so important, but what if I've got a negative balance at the end of the month, right? So I'm not going to go get my nails done or go on a vacation because I got no money.
Right.
But suddenly with this self-direction, there's this pool of money sitting there that I can't use on myself, but I can use to help my children have experiences to benefit them, and for also for us to have a break and be able to go and have somebody that we trust stay there who's getting paid well, to take care of our kids on the spectrum. So that's something I would highly suggest people look into. It's the self-direction services.
Oh man, that's so good. I've never heard of that. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I'm pretty confident that people
It's real. The other piece that's nice too, just being connected to our local church, is we're able to provide jobs to some of these young adults. They're getting paid 20 some dollars an hour. It just it's a win-win. Like they're able to, have an income and have this experience. We trust them. And at the same time, our kids are having, experiences that they wouldn't have otherwise. So
yeah, that's really good. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. That's awesome. Jessica, if my listeners wanted to look you up, learn a little bit more about you, maybe they want to check out the podcast. Maybe my cousin might want to check out the podcast for sure. But where's the best places for them to do all that stuff?
Yeah, it's just jessicahurlbut.com. Hurlbut is HURLBUT.com. My podcast is on there if you want to look up. I mean, where all podcasts are, just the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast. But if you go to my website, it's there too. So you're able to listen to the current episode. I have a blog too. So I blog weekly. I do a weekly devotional for parents. That you don't have to have a child on the spectrum, but a lot of times I talk about autism or adoption and just kind of where our family's at. But yeah, so that's where to find me.
Awesome. Well, listen, Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to visit with me and share your experiences. I know that there are parents out there that are going to get so much out of this episode, and I'm excited to release it. But thank you very much. It's very nice to meet you, and
yes, this is great.
Blessings to you and your husband. But thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Bryan. I appreciate it.
Guys, this has been another episode of Dad Up Podcast. I just want to thank my good friend Jessica again for being on the show. Listen, this is Autism Awareness Month. And if you're a parent out there that is struggling or just unsure of how to cope or how to handle going through this phase of your life where you have a child that maybe is autistic in some way, make sure you guys are reaching out to Jessica, checking out what she's doing, check out the podcast, read her blog, all those kinds of things, because she's a wealth of knowledge, as you just heard. So she knows what she's talking about, and it'll be helpful for you. So make sure you guys are checking it out. Again, thanks to Jessica for being on the show. And if you have not subscribed to my podcast, please make sure you do that. Make sure you subscribe to Jessica's podcast, and then also subscribe to mine so you don't miss any of the awesome guests that I have on each and every week. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Dad Up. Wow, another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at Dad Up Podcast. Until next time, everyone, Dad Up.